Yael Goldman had been back in Israel for exactly 3 months, 2 weeks and 4 days, when she finally understood that her Princeton MBA meant absolutely nothing in the line at the Ramat Gan post office. She stood there, clutching her carefully organized folder of documents, watching a woman in her 70s somehow materialize at the front of the queue while simultaneously arguing with the postal clerk about the philosophical implications of registered mail versus regular mail. This was not covered in her international business strategy courses. "Excuse me," Yael said in her perfect American accented Hebrew to the man beside her. "Was that woman here before me?" The man, wearing paint-splattered overalls and reading a newspaper, looked at her with the expression of someone explaining quantum physics to a golden retriever. "She's Miri. She's always here. But I've been waiting for 45 minutes. "Ah," he nodded sagely, "you're new." This was Yael's problem. After 15 years in Manhattan, where queues were sacred and orderly, and everyone silently honored the social contract of first come, first served, she had returned to her homeland completely unprepared for the beautiful chaos of Israeli line culture. Her first month back had been brutal. At the bank, she'd waited an hour only to discover that the number system was more of a gentle suggestion than an actual system. At the Ministry of Interior, she'd been outmaneuvered by a grandmother who claimed her granddaughter was getting married next week and needed her passport updated immediately, a story that Yael later learned the woman used every Tuesday. But it was at Super Farm on that terrible Thursday morning that Yael had her breakthrough moment. She'd been standing behind a young soldier for 20 minutes, watching him text on his phone, when suddenly a woman in designer sunglasses swept past both of them and began loading prescriptions into her Prada bag. "Slicha," Yael called out, her inner Princeton assertiveness finally kicking in. "I was here first." The woman turned, looked Yael up and down and said, "Sweetie, I've been coming here for 12 years. Ronnie knows my order." She gestured to the pharmacist, who indeed was already preparing her medications without being asked. That's when it clicked for Yael. This wasn't about rules. It was about relationships. It wasn't about systems. It was about stories. Every queue in Israel was actually a complex social ecosystem, where hierarchy was determined not by arrival time, but by a sophisticated algorithm of personal connections, life circumstances, and the unspoken understanding that sometimes you just need to get your antibiotics before your kid's fever gets worse. Armed with this revelation, Yael began her transformation. She started chatting with people in lines, not networking, chatting. She learned that David at the post office was worried about his son in the army. She discovered that Miriam, the mysterious queue-jumping grandmother, was actually picking up medications for 3 different elderly neighbors who couldn't make the trip themselves. She found out that the pharmacist, Ronnie, really did know everyone's prescriptions by heart and took genuine pride in having medications ready before customers even asked. Slowly, Yael became part of the ecosystem. "Yael!" David would call out when she entered the post office. "How's the new apartment?" Miriam began saving her spots when she stepped out to take work calls, and Yael started doing the same for others. At Super Farm, Ronnie began preparing her allergy medication when he saw her walking across the parking lot. The breakthrough came 6 weeks later at the Ministry of Interior, the final boss battle of Israeli bureaucracy. Yael had an appointment to update her status as a returning resident, a process that should have been straightforward, but had somehow become a 3-month odyssey, involving 7 different offices and documents that appeared to exist in parallel dimensions. She arrived at 9 a.m. sharp for her 9:15 appointment, only to find 40 people already waiting in what appeared to be organized chaos. No numbers, no clear line, just a room full of people who all seemed to know something she didn't. The old Yael would have stood uncertainly by the door, clutching her appointment slip and waiting for someone to explain the system. The new Yael surveyed the room like a general planning a campaign. She spotted Mrs. Friedman, whom she'd met at the post office, struggling with a stack of papers. She helped organize the documents while learning about Mrs. Friedman's grandson's university application deadlines. She shared her phone charger with a young father whose baby was getting cranky. She offered to help translate forms for a recent immigrant from Ethiopia who was clearly overwhelmed. When the clock finally called out, "Goldman," at 11:30, Yael realized something miraculous had happened. Not only was she no longer annoyed by the wait, but she'd actually enjoyed the morning. She'd helped 3 people with their paperwork, learned about a great falafel place in Ramat Gan, and gotten a recommendation for a reliable contractor from Mrs. Friedman. As she walked up to the clerk's window, the young father called out, "Yael, good luck." Mrs. Friedman gave her a thumbs up. Even the Ethiopian gentleman smiled and waved. The clerk, a woman who had the power to make or break Yael's entire repatriation process, looked up and said, "You're the one who helped Shimshon with his forms?" "Yes," Yael replied. "He's my cousin. Very nice, what you did." The clerk stamped 3 different documents with particular emphasis. "Welcome home." Walking out of the ministry building 45 minutes later, with all her paperwork completed, Yael realized she'd learned something they don't teach in business school. In Israel, queues aren't just about waiting, they're about community. They're temporary villages where strangers become neighbors, where everyone's story matters, and where the person who helps others invariably gets helped in return. Her phone buzzed with a text from her American friend Sarah. "How are you surviving the chaos over there?" Yael looked back at the ministry building where people were still waiting in their beautiful, complicated, thoroughly human line and typed back, "I'm not surviving it. I'm joining it." That evening, she called her mother in New Jersey. "So new?" her mother asked. "How's the adjustment going?" "I think," Yael said, watching her neighbors chat on the building steps while their kids played in the courtyard, "I'm finally learning how to be Israeli again." "What does that mean?" Yael thought about her morning at the ministry, about David and Miriam and Ronnie, about the way a simple act of kindness in a queue had opened doors she didn't even know existed. "It means understanding that efficiency isn't always about speed," she said. "Sometimes it's about connection. And sometimes the longest way to get somewhere is actually the fastest way to feel like you belong." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your father says that sounds very Israeli." "Tell him," Yael laughed, "that I'm finally learning to speak the language." The next morning, Yael had to return to the post office to mail some documents to her lawyer in New York. She took her number, 47, and saw they were currently serving number 23. In the old days, this would have ruined her morning. Instead, she settled in with her book, nodded to Miriam, who was indeed always there, and prepared to spend a pleasant hour becoming more Israeli, one queue at a time. When David called out, "Number 47," 2 hours later, Yael realized she'd barely noticed the wait. She'd been too busy living in it.